An Empire of Ice is the name of the book. Scott Shackleton and the Heroic Age of Antarctic Science is the subtitle. Edward Larson, professor here at Pepperdine University, is the author. Professor Larson, who is Roald Amundsen?
Amundsen was the Norwegian, the competitor, actually a great explorer himself. He was the first to do the Northwest Passage, first person to ever lead a group through the Northwest Passage. That cinched his fame as an Arctic explorer. Before that, he had gone down to the Antarctic with a Belgian expedition, and he is credited with saving that expedition, or one of the people who saved it when it got trapped in the ice. His hero was Nansen, the great Arctic explorer of Norway, and he had a passion for exploring. And his plan was to be the first to the North Pole, but when Robert Peary claimed to have made it to the North Pole, he, without telling anyone, shifted his expedition toward the South Pole. He was already packed to go to the north and sailed south and managed to steal a march on Robert Scott, who was a Brit heading that way, and with superb dog handling and superb planning, he became the first person to reach the South Pole.
Roald Amundsen was.
Roald Amundsen was,
What
yes.
year was that?
That was in 1919 in December, late in December of 1919. The seasons are reversed, of course, in the South Pole. There, what is our winter is, the Northern Hemisphere's winter is their summer. So the only time it's possible to travel overland, over the polar ice cap, as it were, a polar plateau as it is, a polar plateau in the Southern Hemisphere in Antarctica, is in the middle of their summer, which means you can leave in, say, October or November, which is their spring, go there as fast as you can, and then come back. And he made it back before it turned really cold, made it back to his base. He went in through south of New Zealand. He sailed down. The place you can get closest to the pole by ship, and you can only get there in the Antarctic summer, because it's frozen with just sea ice over the top, and so a ship can't get in. But it opens up in the Antarctic summer. The sea ice opens up, and you can sail in quite close, because you think of Antarctica as a plate, or as a dish, but actually it has a peninsula sticking way out on the side under the Americas, and it's got a big gouge cut out of it, almost like a piece of the pie taken out, which is the Ross Sea, south of New Zealand. And so if you sail in that way, in the summer you can sail in a lot further. So what he'd done is he'd sailed in the previous summer, that would be the summer of 1910-11, wintered over in a base that he built at the southern part of the Ross Sea, right on the Ross Ice Shelf, actually, at something known as the Bay of Whales, which is a cut in the ice shelf. Brought down a prefabricated cabin, brought down all of his dogs, brought down his other men, 9 of them, and they wintered there. And then when it was spring, they headed out in a mad dash on with their sleds, dog sleds, and the skis. He'd mastered dog sledding. He'd mastered cross-country skiing, Nordic skiing, just being a Norwegian. But he's mastered cross-country skiing, dog sledding, in that when he'd made the Northwest Passage, the first person ever to sail through the Northwest Passage, it actually took him 3 years. He started 1 year, was frozen in partway, waited out the winter, sailed some more, was frozen in again, and then sailed out the next year. And so he had plenty of time during the Arctic winters to learn dog sledding from the Inuit people who lived there. And he was very familiar and cordial with the Inuit people, and learned the skills of dog sledding, and also learned the skills of their warm wear, their types of clothing, all of which he used for his magnificent drive on the South Pole.
When you say he wintered there,
yes.
How many months was that? What was the temperature? Then, how long did it take him? How many miles was it to the so-called South Pole?
Well, by wintering down there, you have, it varies, because you never quite know when it's going to ice in and when it's going to open up. But you have basically 4 months of total darkness. That is, the sun has set, because you're below the Antarctic Circle there. and the sun is set, and it's just totally dark. May, June, July, August, totally dark. The sun sets in late April. It comes back up in September. But April and May are unsleddable. Even though there's some light, of course there's a dawn, but there's some actual sunlight during that period. He tried to set out in September, and that's why I say it's a little tricky how you put it. Tried to set out in September, it was too early, he went back, and he left again in October. So you have about 6 months, 5.5 months when it would be at that time you couldn't have traveled. Now that's still true, of course. We have people who winter over the United States, the Russians, the Chinese, others have people who winter over at bases on the polar plateau. The Americans is right on the South Pole. It's a wonderful place to go. Doing research on this book, I was able to go there. But I went there in the summer. But people winter over there, but they can't get in and out. There is no you can't fly in and out in the winter. You're isolated there. So what they did is that was before what we would know. They had radio, but they didn't have radio that could reach a place like that. And so once they went out of radio communication heading south, or once they left their last port, really, with their case, they didn't even have a radio because they couldn't have gone that far with the radio. They were out of communication. So they went out of communication in what would be what would have been in 1910. They wintered over. There was no communication, totally dark. They spent that entire time preparing for the pole, getting their dogs in shape, getting their skis in shape, getting their runners in shape, and then as early as they could, they headed out on a mad dash toward the South Pole, but a brilliantly executed dash. Amundson was a tremendous planner, and what he did is he left supplies at equal distances and then left markers up that he would leave stretching out. There was the supply depot left as he was going out, and actually the year before they left some supply depots where they would depot food, and then they'd leave markers running out in a horizontal line. So when they're coming back, even if they've lost their direction a little bit, and he was an excellent navigator on ice, an excellent navigator in water too, because you'd use the sun to locate your position. If he was missing, he'd at least run into one of his flags, and the flags would tell him if he was to the right or left and how far, and then he could go in and get to his depot. So he'd leave depots of food going out, and again, some were pre-laid, and then coming back. That way he didn't have to carry it all. And then coming back, he would hit those supply depots and then get renewed food. Of course, he was traveling by dog, and one advantage by dog is they pull the sleds, but they also don't have to carry their own food because to be blunt, they eat each other. You just slaughter the dogs as you go, and you take too many, and then the dogs basically carry their own weight.
How many men wintered over? 9 men. How many dogs?
Oh, I don't know. I think he had about 50, 60 dogs, and some survived. He brought some back, donated them to a later expedition by Mawson, a great expedition by an Australian, by Mawson. So he brought some back.
Edward Larson, how many miles was it from the winter camp to the
About
South Pole?
500.
About 500. How many days did it take them?
It took him out and back. It took him 99 days. Out and back. That included several days staying at the pole because you want to know you're actually there. Of course, the pole, unfortunately, there's no barbershop at the pole. It's a featureless high plateau. Then you're 2 miles high, over 2 miles high, because it's behind mountains and it's 2 miles thick of ice. So you're over 2 miles high. You're at high altitude at the South Pole in the whole polar plateau, and you have to use devices. Back then they didn't have a GPS system, so they had to watch the sun, and the sun, they got there in late December, so it was right near, for them, the summer solstice. So the sun was going around there almost directly in a circle, and you would have to take measurements from the sun to figure out where you are. So they went to where they thought was the pole based on their dead reckoning, and they had a device to measure how far they traveled, and then they adjusted they spent several days figuring out their location, and so they would move. They found out they were a few miles off,